Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3, the last day of this year's Science, Technology, and Human Rights Conference. We are very excited. I'm very excited to have this session to learn from an initiative at the University of Dayton focusing on engineering and human rights education. And it's something that we've been following and in some ways contributing to, but really is a leadership effort in this area by the university. And so I'm delighted to learn from you, Shelley.
Good morning, everyone. And indeed, as Teresa said, this initiative really comes from a partnership, an early partnership with AAAS and with Teresa's vision and input, as well as others here. So a lot of this has to do with having this engagement with AAAS. So my name is Shelley Inglis. I think I know many of you. And I'm the executive director of the Human Rights Center at the University of Dayton. And I'm, joined on this panel by my colleague, Kelly Bohr, who's executive director of the Ethos Center, which is an engineering center at the university out of the School of Engineering, and two E4C Engineering for Change colleagues, Lauren Reiserman and Himanshu Pandey. And I'm not going to give their bios because you can read their bios. I am simply going to put our names up there. My name actually has an EY, so you can see who we are. Himanshu's coming in from his home in India, and it's great that his connectivity is working. And I want to first, thank everybody again and mention that we will take you through this conversation in a way that we hope you will contribute to it as well, because this has been an initiative that we've been learning along the way. And with E4C, it's an effort to learn even more about the intersection between human rights and engineering and how to educate and prepare engineers to engage in vocational pathways that reinforce and promote human rights. So with that, to get into the very specific background, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly, and we'll be engaging you throughout the conversation. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shelley, and welcome to everyone. So glad that you could join us this morning. We are excited today to come together to share a little bit about more about the collaboration work that we have done, and to introduce you to the folks that we've been working with from Engineering for Change and the wonderful landscape analysis that they've done for us. I want to give you a little bit of a background, either as a reminder for those of you that joined us at AAAS last year, or for those that weren't able to join us, just to where we're at with this particular initiative and where we're heading with this particular initiative and collaboration around engineering and human rights. If you joined us at AAAS last year, you may have joined and seen Shelley. We did a workshop, Shelley and I and two of our engineering faculty colleagues, as we discussed opportunities for human rights and engineering partnerships and partnerships that exist in the field, current frameworks like the SDGs to engage students, and leveraging assets of institutions, values, and commitment, and how those all might be opportunities for educating future engineers. Since that presentation, the University of Dayton has completed designing our human rights and engineering minor, which is specifically for engineering students, making it a very unique minor, actually, and the first of its kind in the United States. As you will hear later, there are other minors in human rights that certainly engineering students take, but this one was specifically designed for engineering students. And we are happy to say that it has been fully approved through all processes of curriculum approval. So our students can now start participating in that minor. As part of that minor, we were interested in, of course, the landscape analysis of, what are the opportunities and what really does exist in the field for educating engineers in this way, but also what are their vocational trajectories? Are there any opportunities? What needs to be created or fostered? for our engineers as they get this minor, what's next for them? And that obviously was a question that faculty, staff, and students at the university were asking us. This is great, and engineering students certainly are signing up for it out of a passion for this sort of work in the world. But then what? How can they bring that into their vocation? So based on conversations last year at AAAS, we got a lot of feedback from the discussions we had in the workshop. Conversations throughout this year with faculty, staff, and students, and organizations like ASEE, NAS, NAE, and other organizations. And the need to learn more, we were interested in how do we find out this information, and luckily had a really great connection with Engineering for Change. As we were discussing with them what we were doing, they said, hey, what about a fellow? What about having someone hiring a fellow that would give both of the experience to the person that we hire, at the same time giving us a really great landscape analysis report to help us think about where do we need to advance this field. And that would be in 3 particular areas we were interested in curriculum, research, and vocations. So we are thrilled today to give you this report that the Human Rights Center and the Ethos Center and the School of Engineering came together to collaborate to sponsor a fellow at the University of Dayton through Engineering for Change. And just a kind of a couple of thoughts to leave you with as you hear about the results of the landscape analysis. And certainly, like Shelley said, we do want you to interact throughout, and we'll have opportunities for that. But I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts as well that we think about at the University of Dayton. So we're particularly thinking about future engineers and the future world of engineering in light of the tragedies of the world and the unequal access to technology and to science, and then, of course, the right of scientists. So a couple of thought-provoking questions, not to be answered now, but just to think about. Should human rights guide public policy to slow or stop research and development in certain areas? Or is human rights a normative framework to promote advances in science and technology, and instead can be used in a way that actually advances human rights? So how can we go about applying technology for human rights? And how can we go about applying human rights for technology in the future of engineering in our world? And I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and I'm happy later on to answer any questions you might have about what we're doing at the University of Dayton in regards to this. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and this is really, a very downstream effort to create next generations of engineers with human rights knowledge. Yesterday and throughout this conference, we've been talking about, how to respond to the demands of today in terms of AI and human rights and some of the challenges we face. We realize that this effort is not going to immediately respond to that, but it is a downstream effort to generate engineers who have an understanding at the primary basis, right, in their undergraduate education of human rights. So now we're going to hand it over to Himanshu, who's going to talk a little bit about, while that sounds great, how challenging it really is to try and work through these rather large areas of engineering on the one hand, and of course the human rights discipline and practice on the other. So Himanshu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So this project is really close to me because I essentially had a very hard time navigating on this boundary. I was born in extreme poverty at a place that is really affected by a lot of violence. So I had first-hand seen the role that structures play, and technology and law, all of these structures, how they benefited the ones who can afford them. So I had seen that how devoid intervention, especially grounded or not grounded in human rights, and do to us. I would go to university, attain education, and I was having a decent career in engineering, but I really wanted to come back to my communities because I was an exception to that reality. I really wanted to come back and work with them and to empower them. It was very difficult. I had a hard time. There was no guidance. There was not a community of practitioners who were working on the intersection of human rights and engineering. So I knew a lot of problems in my communities back home could be solved by really great engineering innovations, but there was no way on how to operationalize them, how to put them in context, how to collaborate with the ideas of equity and sustainability. And for all of that to take place, there is some amount of naturally grounded amalgamation that has to take place between human rights and engineering. And it's not just me, and it looks, if you try to put them together, it's not as easy to figure out. So, and it's way more practical than one of the participants in our research said, that it's the core human rights look like a declaration of good intentions and ideas, but it's very practical. In fact, to be present today in this panel, I had to struggle a lot with finding access to internet. Distal access does not really lead to distal equity, and that's the world we live in. Probably a bit far from certain places, but this amalgamation and its impact, this collaboration between human rights and engineering and its impacts are very real. They have possibility to lead a future that everyone deserves. And being the first hand, I have seen the first hand what that collaboration might look like and what its impacts might be. But it's not really easy to understand how to operationalize this lens. So in fact, if you go to the next slide, you would be able to see that we put two different prompts about two different professionals trying to bring human rights in their own professions. And DALI is a AI model that is trained on petabytes of data, and it can form out billions and trillions of patterns. But it had so much hard time operationalize how an engineer can work with human rights. For lawyers, they have a lot of metaphors, right? So I would hand it over to back to Shelley, who can introduce Lauren about how we try to understand and uncover these complex intersections and what particular lenses can emerge out of it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Himanshu. Yeah, Himanshu is in the field as an engineer trying to do this work in human rights and knows firsthand how challenging it can really be. So now I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Reinersman, who has been our E4C fellow doing the research and has done a tremendous job. She's going to take us through what our findings are, and then we'll engage you in helping us think them through further. Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Shelley. So in order to fully understand the gaps and trends in the knowledge regarding the intersection of human rights and engineering, the landscape analysis included 5 main steps: desk research, interviews, data synthesis, data analysis, and reporting. And just a note, if at any point in this presentation you see the abbreviation HRIE, that just means human rights in engineering. Next slide, please. So there were 11 interviews that were officially conducted with a variety of people of different backgrounds. So we broke them up into 3 main categories: the academics, people who were affiliated with the universities; engineers, or people who had formal engineering training and had applied that in some kind of manner; and then nonprofits or non-government organizations that are actively involved in either engineering or science or tech, and human rights and social justice, that kind of thing. And then we also just wanted to acknowledge the different specialties that were underneath, and you could read that there. So there are 3 main results, categories of results that I'll be presenting today, and I'm breaking it up for you now so you can follow it throughout the whole presentation, and hopefully it's very straightforward. But basically, we're starting with curriculum suggestions. So how do we diversify the engineering curriculum? What are the advancements in the engineering and human rights pedagogies? How do students engage with this material in the classroom and outside of the classroom? And what are the institutional roles? I wish that I could include every detail that I learned throughout this whole presentation or throughout this whole research process that spanned 5 months. But then we would take up the rest of the day, and that wouldn't be fair to the other people who have presentations today. So just do be thinking about these categories and your own experiences with them, and there'll be an opportunity to discuss them in between each category. So a lot of us are already here at this conference because we already believe in the power and the importance of developing skills and collaborating across disciplines. We know that people who are sensitized to challenges and contexts outside of their quote unquote normal work sphere are better able to re-engineer processes to anticipate compliance problems and enhance efficiencies, according to some professors from the University of Connecticut and their human rights program. So students are in a unique position because they're able to kind of like more productively collaborate because they're already in such a diverse environment on campus. And it's important that they keep listening to their community and engaging their knowledge and connections into the world beyond academics so that they don't learn engineering, quote unquote, in a silo. We're trying to de-silo engineering education. And several sources throughout my research have agreed that it's so important to diversify these skills, and that actually makes engineers more employable and better able to solve complex problems, especially problems with far-reaching consequences and influences. So how do academic institutions support this level of diversity in the engineering curriculum? Well, there are a couple of ways. There are several programs across the US and across the globe, but this research was specifically focusing on US institutions that are already accomplishing this by offering courses or tracks at the intersection of human rights, sustainability, ethics, engineering, business, and way more. So there are two main pedagogical strategies. One, classroom level changes, and two, college-wide changes. Specifically at the classroom level, when teaching about human rights and engineering, multiple sources agree it's a good idea not only to teach the foundational theory, but also to draw on students' passions and their relationships and use that to discuss the implementation of these theories in real life. Human rights is universal. And so that's really good because then students have the opportunity to notice similarities between these international case studies and their own communities. And that helps them connect to problems and understand these complex problems in ways that otherwise may seem very distant. Other courses have also added hands-on projects or research components so that students are required to practice the knowledge in a very concrete way. And professors have concluded that have conducted studies which found that it's helpful to keep engaging students in this material even throughout the second year, just beyond those freshman seminar courses, because it's a very formative time when they're choosing their careers and co-ops or internships and that kind of thing. And finally, leading by example, previous slide, please, still. Leading by example is incredibly powerful. If professors want to prove to students and human rights that human rights and engineering intersect in very relevant ways, then collaborating across their own departments with research and by co-teaching courses is a very strong and visual example to set. And it also helps to bring in alumni or professionals who are in the industry at this intersection to show students that careers in this field are feasible and very important. Next slide, please. So those are the strategies for the classroom, but what about the strategies for school-wide changes? I conducted two case studies of two universities. One had a very established, multi-decade-old human rights program, and they've been collaborating with their engineering students for a long time. And then the other university had a pretty much brand new engineering program that was still very new and uses a more holistic approach to engineering ethics. For example, around Halloween time, they have a series called Engineering Horror Stories, and they use those, they use that time to discuss the ethics around engineering failures. And then eventually they were able to start building relationships with other programs or nonprofits, like to form opportunities for students to study abroad and to apply human rights, ethics, and engineering in a more practical way. So it takes a while to integrate human rights and engineering into the structure of your school. And, those examples that I just gave are good ways to begin that process before you can work your way up towards having very dynamic collaborations, such as offering courses with mixed discipline students. So having students from engineering and human rights in the same classroom, working on papers, reading and discussing case studies, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So no matter how exposure to human rights and engineering is incorporated into the school's program, it's still very important to be aware of how students are actually engaging with the presented material. Part of the landscape analysis was to see the ways that students were interacting with this cross-discipline material. So I accumulated a list of organizations that are either one, very common for students who are interested in human rights and engineering to be involved with already, or two, are very good opportunities for students to expand their involvement during or after college. These are just examples, and there's also more opportunities such as different internships with state departments or the EPA or other organizations like that. But outside of these organizations, studies have been conducted on how students engage with the material in these classrooms. For example, one study on equity ethics found that students who have personally experienced marginalization are more likely to be interested in equity ethics. And they wanted to help increase equity, but sometimes didn't feel like they had the supportive environment they needed to make that change. So therefore, it was recommended that institutions should learn the motivations and interests of their marginalized students and offer the curricula and professional development tailored to their equity ethic. The bottom line is really just to try and relate to students at their level. Next slide, please. So we've reached a point in, it's the last bullet point in the curriculum category, but it's not the least important. In fact, so many of our interviewed sources, unprompted, brought up this relationship of institutional support that it kind of warranted its own section in the final report. Whether academic department or nonprofit, lasting impact often doesn't extend from individual students' contributions while in school, but rather from invested faculty and staff that provide the longevity and the continuity that the program needs. So champions of human rights and engineering need to be able to convey the urgency of change to stakeholders like the dean and donors and board members. And those are just a couple of examples. There are way more than that. And program directors should also be strategic and knowledgeable about the outside influences of their successes of their program. For example, Jennifer Carpenter is the dean of the engineering program at Campbell University. And so she's pretty much like built up this program from scratch, and she's had significant experience working with stakeholders to bring about desired foundational change at the institutional level. And she suggests working towards institutional support by providing positive and evidence-based results in regular updates to the stakeholders. Once university programs and even nonprofits have institutional support, human rights and engineering will have the tools and resources required to prepare engineers to enter into rights-related vocations. Next slide.
So we wanted to take a moment and engage you all, I don't know if there's anybody online, in a little bit of feedback from your experience. We had this conversation earlier in this conference around how to integrate human rights into psychology as a discipline. And this is very similar approach, integrating human rights into the engineering school and engineering as a discipline. I don't know if anybody here has experiences with any classroom, curricular, student-oriented work around engineering and human rights that you could share with us that could help sort of enhance our findings in this area, but we wanted to open it up to your expertise. Over to you. Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is John Gardner, longtime AAAS member, and I've been with the Human Rights Group ever since it started. I just want to point out a resource that I don't think is universally known, not nearly as universally as it needs to be in this subject, and that is the journal Science and Engineering Ethics. It has an editor in Europe, initially in England, and one in the United States, initially at MIT. I don't know who those were, both became friends of mine. So I have been involved with the journal on a personal as well as a professional level. I've published there myself. I recommend it very highly. I consider it a very high quality journal, peer reviewed, of course. But it's expensive. It's published by Springer. I could not afford to get it, and I don't have any university affiliation, so I didn't have a university library available to me. But I would urge anyone involved in this area to make sure that they have some form of access to that journal and keep up with it to the extent that they can. And by all means, when you have some of these very good and innovative ideas, especially on human rights, which hasn't been featured so much in the journal, please submit articles and get human rights more widely known in that field. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. And maybe we will work, Kelly and I, on an article to submit around this work. It's an excellent suggestion. And we will go to a research area where we really tried to look for the journals that would help us move this forward. An interesting conversation also to have is sort of the differences and the overlap between ethics and human rights and engineering. Yes, thank you.
Hi, I appreciate what you're doing here. I'm Brian Schmasky. I'm environmental scientist at Lone Star College. And for the past, 15 years, I've been engaging students in environmental justice issues locally. And also we've worked several countries overseas, I should say several regions overseas. And what we've run into a lot over the years is going into areas where high-tech engineering was used to resolve particularly water security issues and pollution remediation issues. And my students had to get engaged in first deconstructing systems that were not done properly. And I'm thinking of, particularly in the Philippines, a project where we literally had to dismantle a sewage treatment plant that could not be maintained by the locals, was becoming a problem in itself. And we learned that by staying lower tech with local resources and also getting community input. And I mean, many of the people we were working with did not have anything much past the middle elementary education. And they still had local knowledge of materials, what their needs were to do these projects. So that's just something I encourage, because our most successful projects were ones where we listened and actually took the local knowledge, did not come in as, I'm going to fix your problems type of approach. So I just want to share that because that's been 15 years of experience doing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great pedagogical point, as well as an overall point about how to do engineering that's appropriate and contextual and sustainable. Thanks.
Hey, my name is Jared Owens. I work for the Arizona State University Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes here in DC.
Yes.
I am tremendously interested in this, and we'll have to be careful not to ramble on too much. But I actually started out at NC State to be an engineer. I went there for engineering, and for a number of reasons ended up switching out of that to study philosophy, psychology, and STEM education. One reason of which was what I perceived as an extreme lack of humanity or any attention to ethics in engineering, and even open mocking of the humanities in the classroom at one point. And I ended up coming back around to engineering through engineering ethics, and actually occasionally deliver challenger case study talks to engineering students at NC State. And in doing so, to kind of address the question of my experiences in the classroom, when I get student feedback, I have heard far more than I would like to hear from students saying, oh, I really had no idea that there was a connection between ethics and engineering, which on the one hand, I'm glad that I can be the person to introduce that to them. On the other hand, I'm very scared and concerned that they hadn't even realized. And I don't think that's a problem with them. That's a problem with education. So that was one experience I'd like to share. And I also have a question that kind of follows up on that. Particularly in the case of ethics, but I imagine it'd also be applicable to human rights as well. When engineering ethics is taught as much as it is taught, it usually focuses on addressing the issues and kind of how do we think about these problems? How do we work through them? But then there's another step that's actually what are we going to do about it? And how can I, as an individual engineer or a group of engineers, actually promote or make change without putting my own career at risk too much, which, as we all know, unfortunately, a lot of times when you speak up, you end up getting shot down, your career gets hurt, and things don't actually get done. So I think that that's an important aspect of this that doesn't get talked about too much. And I was wondering if that is in your curriculum anywhere or something like that.
Yeah, no, great. Both your expertise and your experience and the question, and I'll let the panel respond. I just want to give two contextual points. The first point is I didn't say it up front, and I should have. The University of Dayton is a Catholic Marianist institution, which means students who come into the institution come with an understanding that there will be a faith-based and ethical-based approach, no matter which part of the institution they're from. So I think we're not common in sort of what I would say would be secular schools of engineering, where the students might not have any expectation that they're going to be asked to think about their vocation or about the ethical context of their work. At the same time, which is why it's maybe easier in a place like the University of Dayton that has a longstanding also commitment to human rights to innovate in this space. At the same time, I think you are right, and my experience has been that the ethics don't go far enough in terms of both enabling students to understand that there are real life norms and structures and institutions out there that try and make ethics a reality, like human rights frameworks and norms and international institutions. And it doesn't give them enough of a sense of how do they put those ethics into actual practice. And I wanted to make a nod to your point about freedom of expression, which is the overall, I think, theme to this conference. And in fact, if you think about this at a very meta level, what we're trying to do is create engineers who have the knowledge and the confidence to speak up, to promote human rights, to advocate, to promote the right to science, and to promote the reality of their own freedom of expression and the freedom of expression and ideas of others. But I want to give the panel a chance, either Kelly or Lauren or Himanshu, to talk a little bit about what we found in this space in engineering ethics, teaching, and human rights. Would somebody like to go?
Actually, I would have a quick pointer about the role of community in it. So, working with different stakeholders on this boundary, I found it much easier to work with the bosses and to be able to raise the human rights violation or concerns in the projects where these folks have some amount of understanding of human rights. So whether they have worked with colleagues who have worked in that sector or who have come from that background where they have taken a university course on the topic, or in fact, if I bank on my experience, I found it even easier to raise those concerns with somebody who has worked with human-centered design. So a lot of listening, narrative inquiry with the community. So I guess this is where it boils down to have certain amount of, to create these professionals who can have and bank upon their community to raise those voices in the projects that they do. I think that's immensely powerful.
Okay, I think we want to engage you in further discussion, but we're going to do a little bit more presentation and then ask another question. So Lauren, over to you.
Thanks. So the next results category then is vocational pathways. What are some ways that you can live out this vocation or calling to human rights and engineering? What are some barriers to that vocation? What are the industry relationships with or perceptions with human rights and engineering? And finally, how to properly use engineering power. Next slide, please. There are many ways to live out a calling or vocation to human rights and engineering. An engineering professor teaching human rights in Sri Lanka listed 9 scenarios in which engineers should be prepared to respect and protect human rights. The benefits of doing so ranged from creating a successful a product label that consumers trust is ethical, to maintaining most favored nation status while conducting businesses with foreign nations, and even obtaining from the World Bank for construction projects. And there were a lot more examples, but the idea is that every engineer should benefit from knowing the human rights framework in each scenario, even if they didn't specialize in human rights. And if someone's vocation is to specialize in human rights, they can apply that in many ways too. They can conduct soil and water contamination analysis to determine human rights impacts of mining on local communities. Or they can work with FEMA or US aid, or go into global development and work with nonprofits abroad. Engineers play a critical role in facilitating projects as well. And they're in a unique position in that they can kind of straddle the governmental standards and regulations while also solving problems at the community level by understanding the needs and constraints of both parties. So learning to ask these questions about who they're truly designing for and how their design will impact multiple groups, this awareness ultimately makes them just better problem solvers. If you start paying attention and asking the right questions, you'd be surprised by all the ways that you can respect, protect, and fulfill human rights within your work too. Next slide, please. So this is all well and good. We've acknowledged that engineers have an important responsibility to be thoughtful designers and problem solvers, and that some people are called to stronger interactions with the human rights framework in their day-to-day work than others are. But unfortunately, there are still some pretty big barriers that make it difficult to live out this vocation. I actually talked about some of them, and I'm here to share some of the three main themes with these barriers. One, among industry leaders especially, there's a lack of understanding of what human rights in engineering actually is. So even though interviewed industry professionals were working with human rights every day, specifically with sustainability or climate justice, they still had a hard time recognizing it and still questioned whether it was feasible to incorporate human rights and engineering specialties into their design processes and job descriptions. Two, organizations and companies that do recognize the value of human rights framework to problem solving may have trouble connecting with those talented engineers or professionals that could fill those jobs. It's rare to be able to post these kinds of job availabilities on traditional job sites. And on top of that, the jobs themselves might be spread out across the globe, or even only like a short-term project based. So engineers who do meet the qualifications may not be in the financial or career position to leave a stable job or a short-term project abroad, even if they hear about the position. And finally, number three, engineering as a profession and not just as specialized occupations lacks an expectation for pro bono work. Doctors and lawyers kind of have this expectation already, and there's even some requirements built into their professional certifications. And so their employers respect and support that and hold them to that standard. Engineering isn't quite there yet. If there was more, again, institutional support to pursue pro bono projects full strength, I think we would see a very different world, and we would be having a very different conversation about the types of jobs available for human rights trained engineers. But there's a silver lining. One interviewee looked at the trend he was seeing throughout his career and noticed that companies have been paying more and better attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And he believes that stronger focuses on human rights as a broader corporate social responsibility theme is not that far behind. And furthermore, a paper in computer engineering field predicts that the demand for value experts, quote unquote, who have a cross-discipline understanding of humanities, technology, and management, those demands for those jobs should increase as well. The paper calls for entrepreneurs and organizations to invest in these new roles early, saying that these roles should not be independent consultants who leave after the project's execution, but rather a team member who is integrated into the team and stays on for future iterations and monitoring. Just a fun fact, previous slide, please. Every single industry professional that I talked to told me that they would be interested in hiring a human rights trained engineer. One in particular cited that it's a high goal at companies to attract and retain talent. And that talent usually takes the form of passionate people. So they all recognize the benefits of engineers who have diverse backgrounds and trainings and can contribute to project discussions in that way. Ultimately, human rights understanding just will not hurt you in the job sphere and will prepare you to better solve problems and to conduct your work better. Finally, I couldn't conduct a conversation about engineering or human rights vocations without discussing engineering power. It's a concept that appeared in several interview conversations and papers throughout the research. So one paper specifically defines engineering power as the ability to bring about certain desired ends through peaceful use of engineering skill or knowledge. In a broader context, however, engineering power exists because in any situation with a knowledge disparity, there's a unique power dynamic. Especially in global development, even well-intentioned collaborations can still foster a colonial mindset, which needs to be avoided. Human rights is all about challenging power, trying to balance it and redistribute it. And therefore, all engineers, but especially engineers trained in human rights, have a responsibility to use their knowledge for good. And they also usually underestimate their own influence, but the benefits of will be wide-reaching if you start training engineers about the ways they can balance power. And that can range from either working with the community so that it becomes more self-sufficient, or it can even incorporate communicating with politicians to bring about systemic change and environmental protection of rights. And those are just two examples.
So back over to you. I'm sorry Teresa's not here because I thought the pro bono point would get her very excited, as she's a lawyer like I am who believes that pro bono responsibilities should extend to engineers and scientists and done this great work of on-call scientists. But we wanted to know what your thoughts were on, vocational pathways. And this is really critical because, as you all know, in the reality of schools of engineering or business schools, individuals come to those schools to get skills and then get jobs, right? These are very practically oriented, skills-based oriented school environments where the expectation is that students will leave the school with a very clear sort of career trajectory in that skill area. Unlike going to an arts and sciences type environment where you might go in multiple directions post your degree. So there is a demand for us to be able to demonstrate, quite honestly, that there are going to be in the future, and even are now, spaces in which young engineering students can use this knowledge, and where industry and others will be looking for engineering students with this knowledge. So we'd love to get your ideas and your experiences with career pathways and vocational pathways, please.
I suspected there was a very good reason why I came to this session. Yes, there's something I really want to say about this, and I suspect these speakers may not be as aware as those of us in the United States of an emerging opportunity. You're well aware of our social and political problems. You're not as aware of the things that are happening under the news media focus. But our National Academy of Sciences is very much interested in this general topic. Recently, they held a 3-day multi-part session on more sustainable future urban infrastructures. I could not attend all of that even on Zoom, but one thing that I think is indicative of the overall answer to this question of emerging opportunities for engineers and scientists in human rights is a huge number of organizations that are focused on trying to do things that cannot be accomplished in industry or at the national level, or often at the state level. And I'm going to highlight one example, which you can look up online, but I want to emphasize that this is only one example of many things. I found out there is an organization called Capital Mayors. So those are city mayors, which doesn't sound all that big if you're thinking in terms of cities in numbers like a few or a dozen or a couple of dozens. This is hundreds of mayors. Now, at that end, they are associated, and they interact and interchange ideas and problems and paths to solutions. Obviously, if you're going to deal with the whole wide area of urban infrastructure, there's a lot of engineering there, and they need a lot of help. And they are very interested in hearing from scientists and engineers about specific problems that they deal with. And I'm going to give you just one brief example of the strange range of this kind of thing. One of the findings from one of their earlier studies was that one of the best ways to reduce gun violence in cities is to tear down old buildings. That is counterintuitive, and no engineering school is going to teach you about that. But that is a far out example of the kinds of broad thinking and ethical concern that groups like this address. So I would urge you in your own countries, cities, or wherever, universities, to look to these. In some cases, they're going to have funding, and they definitely need your engineering expertise.
Thanks so much. And what's so important about that comment is really, we generate engineers at the University of Dayton that usually work in small and medium-sized industry companies, regional in the Midwest. And so this is really about very localized, place-based engagement, not multinational corporations like Shell or other big ones where the jobs are few and far between for sort of the regular standard graduates of engineering schools in the US. Teresa, yay. Thanks for coming.
There are a lot of responsibilities with the conference. Sorry, I had to step out for a minute. Yeah, so this is something that we think a lot about in all the science fields and in engineering and technology. And one of there are always going to be some opportunities for full-time positions in science and human rights, STEM and human rights. What we have tried to expand on that is creating a culture of pro bono service and identifying the ways that what are the mechanisms and opportunities for scientists and engineers to get involved in that. So we started with our On-Call Scientist project, which is a volunteer matching service. We do have a lot of engineers in different fields of engineering who are members of that. And we've been able to find some ways for them to contribute. But it's almost always, so this is the challenge, I think, that maybe put back to the schools and help us with this, is the challenge is always that it's hard for engineers in particular, who are usually in the private sector, in industry, to find that pro bono time, to find that volunteer time they might have their firm or their company might have an allowance for it. You can use this many of your billable hours for public service, but often the kinds of public service are very limited, and there aren't as many opportunities. We're seeing that change, and we're seeing more, particularly in technology, we're seeing more awareness of the value of understanding human rights in the profession and in projects. So, for example, you had Tech Against Trafficking up earlier. So that's a group of big technology companies, name recognition, tech companies we all use, and they are donating their both engineered time and some of their services, like AWS and some of the technology that they've developed for NGOs that are working against human trafficking and creating partnerships there. And so those are really good examples. It's come out of, in a lot of ways, the companies need to build compliance mechanisms for labor rights and labor laws, employment laws, supply chain reporting to comply with anti-human trafficking laws. And so finding those connections, I think, is going to be the key to building this up and scaling it up. The more that happens, the more that the companies are seeing a connection between what they need to accomplish and the connections between human rights and engineering. I think that's where the breakthroughs are going to come.
Fantastic. Thank you. I hope we can get this recording very quickly so that we can use all this input into our report, not wait until it gets out. So this is really helpful. We're going to move on, but we will have an opportunity if you want to revert back to the question of vocational pathways. Lauren, over to you for our last section.
Shelley, is it okay? I want to just jump in really quick.
Yes.
I have partnered with a colleague that's at Lipscomb University in Tennessee, and she actually is involving industry engineers in some of the more humanitarian work that their university is doing with partners they have in Guatemala and I think one other country, that they, partnerships that have been long lasting and really listen carefully to the communities. And as they engage industry partners, usually alumni, they actually have been able to work with the state board of, for continuing education that engineers need to have. So particularly around civil engineering as professional engineers. And they've actually been able to get credit towards the continuing education they need for these engineers to do this. And so the companies are very willing to give them time to do this because they are actually working towards that continuing education they need. So again, it's finding those connections of what's needed that I think is critical. That's great.
Great, thanks. Lauren, back over to you for our last area of inquiry intersection.
That's good. Thank you, Shelley. So last but not least is the research category of the results, discussing where the research is coming from and where it's going. Next slide. One of the questions addressed by the landscape analysis was who is publishing what about human rights and engineering. The desk research phase drew data from over 50 sources, and a large number of those sources were published through the American Society for Engineering Education and other sources, including the United Nations, the Human Rights Group, and other human rights groups such as Business for Social Responsibility, Advocates for Human Rights, and AAAS. Professional organizations like the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers also contributed to the study with papers on value-based engineering ethics, for example. And obviously, universities and the professors at the forefront of the human rights-based STEM programs conduct a fair amount of research and also contribute that at this intersection as well. When it comes to what they are publishing, that range is also pretty broad. Publishers professors publish books on how to teach social justice or engineering ethics or human rights and engineering. And there are also lots of publications about, like journal article publications about, for example, sustainable consumerism and the right to repair, economic rights, and supply chain management ethics. So there's a lot happening in this field in the technical and instructional realms. There are some other important things to notice, though, which is what John Gardner was bringing up as well, which is the issue of accessibility. So all this great research is being conducted and published, but it's not exactly helpful when it's buried in databases or journals that are very expensive and hard for people outside of university settings to access. And furthermore, it's hard for them potentially to access databases that aren't related to their quote unquote like normal work. So if someone specializes in human rights, but they want to collaborate with engineering or look at that intersection, sometimes they just don't have access to the databases, the engineering databases that research is published in, and vice versa. And now that we have an understanding of the current state of existing research in human rights and engineering, it's easier to start identifying the gaps. And here are a couple of questions that came up throughout the research phase of this landscape analysis. They've kind of been broken into two different themes or two different types of questions. Those that specifically address technical shortcomings and how to resolve them while applying human rights, and those that pertain to spreading awareness and teaching about human rights and engineering. These questions became very apparent, and some people were very focused on specific examples, while others were concerned with building the foundational changes for human rights and engineering. And both are very important, and you can't have one without the other, so I wanted to acknowledge that. These questions included, are human rights standards prepared for the challenges of emerging fields like the right to internet and cyber power? How can drone technology be utilized to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights? How do engineers effectively communicate the urgency of change to policymakers and stakeholders to expedite aid? How can human rights education be incorporated into core engineering courses so that students are required to kind of learn this thought process rather than having to take electives or try and squeeze electives into an already very packed engineering curriculum? Are engineers satisfied currently with the work that they're doing and the level of application of human rights in their work, or are they more interested in applying their knowledge in more meaningful fields but just don't know how? A survey of that landscape would be nice as well. And finally, how can technical solutions be implemented to address widespread energy crises and off-grid communities? So as you see, there's a huge range, but you can kind of like categorize them into, human rights and engineering foundations and how do we scale that change? And then also, in technical situations and specific examples, how do we improve the technology and use engineering thought processes to solve specific problems?
So this is, of course, a huge area, and we weren't able to go into and find every article on every aspect of engineering, from civil to to chemical to other spaces and their intersection with human rights. So we do have some caveats on this area because it's just so broad and hard to track. But we'd love your thoughts on what the research questions are that should be posed, where research needs to be pushed in illuminating this intersection, either at the technical level on supply chains or other very specific or civil engineering and urban development and infrastructure, or on sort of the more meta questions about the intersections of the fields. We'd love your thoughts and inputs again. So encouraging everyone, small group, to participate. Over to you, John.
I'm afraid of talking too much, but I will try to limit. There are many answers to this, and I'm sure all of you are aware of several of them. I would just like to emphasize the need to bring out to the specialized fields, whether it's medicine, sanitation, climate, transportation, or whatever, that these are intimately related in the lives of human beings. Also matters of human rights and fairness to various subpopulations depends on having decent housing, decent access to jobs, decent transportation infrastructure, not having highways built through the center of their neighborhoods, and also opportunities for culture. Often cultural venues are in the centers of urban areas where they are relatively inaccessible to low-income populations who nonetheless, despite their low income, often have the intellect and interest to enjoy and appreciate that. Their problems are time, location, and accessibility to transportation. So, and related to all of that is the idea of community science, that in many areas of science and engineering, there have been great benefits over the past few decades in setting up venues and mechanisms whereby ordinary citizens who are directly interested in or involved with a particular issue would love to and do love to meet with scientists and engineers and discuss what can they do to help. Our educations all too often tell us, oh no, we're the big brains and these are stupid little people that have nothing to offer. Right. They do have a lot to offer. Absolutely. And they are very willing to talk in a respectful way, but they want to be respected themselves, of course. So the more opportunity for engagement in a community science concept or community engineering concept with the people who are most affected would be a terrific expansion of our field.
Yeah, thanks, John. Fantastic. And just to say, there's a lot of value that we place on lived experience experts and democratizing knowledge. In fact, Kelly's area of expertise is really community engagement, and she's a biologist, not an engineer. So much of what you're saying very much resonates with our approach.
This is a little bit niche, I think, but it's important. And it comes at the intersection of engineering, ethics, and psychology. Right. Something interesting, particularly to me. In healthcare ethics or healthcare studies, there is a pretty well documented phenomenon called moral distress. Mm-hmm. And it usually is manifest in nursing and with nursing students in cases where somebody feels like they know what the right thing to do is, and for whatever reason they can't do that, whether mm-hmm. there's some sort of institutional barriers for them to doing what they believe is the right thing to do, or they're being forced to carry out the wrong thing. And while this is talked about in healthcare situation and probably also to an extent in business, I haven't seen almost any research on it in engineering. And I think that it would be a very interesting and useful application to see how often engineers feel like they're in these sorts of situations and how the literature in the healthcare industry could maybe impact, the engineers as well. So.
Fantastic. Very cool. I mean, that gets to Lauren and Himanshu's point about the fact that we don't ask engineers, or there are not enough associations asking engineers about these kinds of questions. How much do they feel their values can be put into their work? How much do they think that their work contributes to value-based results, or how much are they constricted by that, and therefore how much internal conflict do they have? And this is a really important question as we move to understanding these young people that we are educating. What are they going to face, and do we need to prepare them with sort of resilience and mental health resilience type techniques to manage industry environments where they're not being allowed to sort of put their values into action in their work? It's a great point. Thank you, Teresa.
So two things. I just want to remind people who are online that to put questions in the chat so that we can see them and share them. But so on Monday, there was a session on human rights education in psychology and combining those. And one of the points that came out that I think we had a lot of discussion about was that it seems to be there was a suggestion that discipline-specific human rights courses and pedagogy are perhaps more effective than general human rights and science or in STEM. And I wondered if that was something that you all came across in creating the program and in your research, or if that hasn't come up yet and would need more research. What the difference between what human rights education looks like in an engineering curriculum versus a psychology curriculum or a sociology curriculum or a physics curriculum.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, I don't know if the colleagues were here online listening to those discussions, but that was fascinating. We did, as Kelly mentioned, we did decide to embed this minor in the School of Engineering, to not suggest that engineers should take the human rights minor in the College of Arts and Sciences. We did that explicitly for Lauren's point about the heavy requirements that are on undergraduate degrees to reach their engineering technical standards. And so we wanted to enable engineers who were interested in human rights to do this work within the context of their own school and curriculum, while there are classes that they have to take, and they would have to take anyway, in many respects, in the general education or the College of Arts and Sciences, and our human rights introductory course, so we call it Human Rights Studies 200, is a requirement for this minor. So it doesn't mean they're all taking only courses within the School of Engineering, but the minor sits within the School of Engineering, and then therefore it makes sure that this is integrated into what is required of them as engineering students. I don't know about the research, and here maybe Lauren can help. What I found interesting about the psychology discussion was the very clear sort of framework that was put forward by the American Psychological Association on the intersection of psychology and human rights, which I thought was very helpful in terms of an association making those clear linkages for its discipline. And then the textbooks, very clear textbooks on how do you teach human rights in psychology. Lauren, did you find any very strong textbooks or other sort of guiding principles in this field? That I'm pretty sure there's no engineering association that has done this, but did you have any findings that might help illuminate on this question?
Specifically textbooks that did what?
So they were highlighting new textbooks that actually talk about how you teach human rights in psychology. So textbooks for courses, not just articles but textbooks, curricular textbooks.
Actually, yes. So not so much psychology or human rights in psychology, but social justice in engineering. There is a textbook-like book that was published by Professor Juan Lucina, and I don't remember the name of the other author, through the Colorado School of Mines, I believe. And they were talking specifically about giving very like pedagogical frameworks and classroom structures and discussion tips and basically like listing out different case studies and ways to like break down social justice and how it relates to engineering. So there was a specific textbook about that.
I think also, Teresa, we haven't gotten far enough to assess, as you're suggesting, is this a more effective way of integrating human rights into the School of Engineering, as opposed to what UConn does, which is to support engineering students in taking human rights courses as a part of the College of Arts and Sciences. But it's an interesting question, and I think for sure we'll need research on the impact of these curricular efforts at multiple levels. Like, it's going to be really important that we evaluate and research the effectiveness of this approach, which is very new.
And just to add to that, Shelley, in thinking about the approach that we took, not only did we make it specific to engineering students to help them build that into their curriculum, but we also, a lot of people asked us when we wanted them all to have an engineering course that had human rights education elements in it that they would take. And a lot of people wondered, well, why don't, we being the Ethos Center, why don't we just create a course that all the ones that want to take this minor take that course and that be the engineering course? And we actually didn't go that route, although I think there's more to be added. But the route that we went was actually trying to work with faculty from each discipline in engineering and training them to build human rights education into their disciplinary course, so that a civil engineering student is hearing about human rights education right from their civil engineering faculty members in a civil engineering course. And the same thing with mechanical engineering and chemical engineering. And we thought that was very important to do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And at this point in the minor, there is within every discipline an engineering course that integrates human rights into basics of robotics or mechatronics. Or so I think we're coming to the end of our time. I don't have the agenda here. I want to just open it up. Maybe Himanshu is sort of our big thinker in terms of putting this all in place globally and thinking about the challenges we have. So I want to give Himanshu an opportunity to do some further reflections, and then we'll close this out.
And Shelley, before Himanshu jumps in, we do have questions online. So
I'll just read a couple of them.
I can't see the questions unless there's somebody monitoring.
Yeah, I'm monitoring, and I'll read a couple questions. We have a couple questions and comments.
Great, thank you.
First comes from Dr. Art Kendall. He says, 1, what other disciplines deal with the question at hand? And 2, in projects, recognize the opportunity for other disciplines. For example, engineers may see that they need input about the needs, values, and attitudes of local populations. They would then look to find help from social/behavioral scientists. Likewise, social/behavioral scientists can be in a position to know when they need help from engineers. So we can first talk about that comment, and we have a couple more questions after that.
Yeah, I can just briefly say that we did have a faculty learning community to develop this minor that integrated both our humanities and social scientists, faculty, law, and engineering from all of the 4 disciplines that we have in the engineering school at the University of Dayton. So the courses that we're talking about in the engineering school, we also created courses that are available to engineers on the College of Arts and Sciences side. So within the humanities and the social sciences that are a part of this minor that are available to them. And so they will be taught by both engineering faculty, their lens on this intersection, but they're also taking classes in the humanities and social sciences, including our introductory course, Human Rights 200. I think that answers part of the question. I did not understand the first element of the question, but maybe Kelly, Himanshu, or Lauren have.
I think
a
it was an interdisciplinary question around how do we work with other disciplines. So for example, when we're working with community, like I think it was John that was talking about the Mayor Society and working with communities on big issues, especially in urban environments. How do we work with other disciplines in doing that? And I would say that our engineering faculty immediately say, who else in the university outside of engineering can we work with? Can we partner with? Can we learn from? I thankfully, and that might just be the way that we are Catholic Marianist University, we're very collaborative. We look across disciplines, that we know we can't just go into communities as an engineer, that it takes social scientists, it takes human rights practitioners. And so that has been important at the University of Dayton. I don't know, Lauren or Himanshu, if you notice in the landscape that analysis you've been doing, if there's been any mention or stress on including other disciplines, not going at it alone.
Absolutely. I don't want to spend too much time reiterating, but yes, basically, yes.
When you mentioned a lot of co-teaching classes, which is something that we've been trying to promote, it's harder within the structures. I think we have 2 more questions on the line.
Yes, and another one just came in, so I'll try to go through these quickly. Joe Carson has a question stating, as a starting point, how can we persuade major engineering societies to join the SHR coalition?
I can answer that, or I can start. One of my final interviews was a professor with Arizona State University, and he was specifically working to bring awareness to industries and companies on the values of human rights trained engineers and these diverse skills and the values that they bring to the company, to the project, that kind of thing. And he's kind of like working on building up a collaboration and, you know, collecting names and connections with companies who are interested in forming that kind of program. And I know that he's specifically working very closely with the Department of Energy, and, you know, how do these questions and conversations pertain and relate to ways that we are addressing the energy crisis? And you know, the Department of Energy is interested in hiring people specifically with these backgrounds. So I don't know if you're referring to specifically is a specific coalition or just like the general movement of human rights and science, but that's a step.
I know we have to go quickly, and we look to AAAS to help us answer that particular question in terms of engineering associations. Other questions?
Okay, so we have another one from Dr. Art Kendall. Do you use practices such as team teaching in a course? Do you include any broad perspectives such as Human Rights 101 on the coalition website?
No, not our human rights course, entry-level course, Human Rights 200 at the University of Dayton is not available on the coalition website. This research will be available on E4C and on UD, and I'm sure because the coalition has been such an essential part of this work that we could find a way to connect. Thoughts, Teresa?
Yeah, we can definitely find a way to to connect and help raise awareness about it. And yeah, I was just going to ask if Jacqueline can go ahead and read all the questions
Sure.
at one time, because we do need to wrap up.
Yeah.
But we can follow up on those questions individually, and I'm sure that some of you from Dayton can follow up on those as well. Jacqueline, could you go ahead and just read all the questions?
Yep, we have one more left. From William Leonard, have you done any work help engineering faculty understand how to incorporate human rights into the broader impacts of a grant proposal?
I can address that really briefly because I want to give Himanshu a minute to wrap this up for us. I do work with faculty in the School of Engineering around broader impacts, not only for grant proposals, but also for their teaching, promotion and tenure process. It is now required that they look at broader impacts in one area as part of that process. And so I do offer workshops and talk to them about everything from sustainability to human rights to social justice and help them incorporate that in. Yeah. Thank you.
So with your, with a moment, we will wrap this up, and we appreciate everybody's patience and apologize if we couldn't get to everybody's questions in depth. Himanshu, we're going to give you the last word.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So when we started this particular exercise, I think we started from the perspective of what a world would look like if engineers were equipped with the knowledge of human rights. But the more we have understood, the more we have dived deep, it's pretty apparent that if engineering products, engineering outcomes, engineers want to stay relevant, it cannot happen without the knowledge of human rights. If you're looking at building a product that integrates artificial intelligence, you want to reach out to consumers of a global landscape, you would have to ensure that your data sets are very ethical and they do not carry the biases that you'll often find in training data sets. Similarly, if you're working on urban infrastructure, you will have to go back and look at the history of human rights in that particular communities and how that leads to equity out there. If engineering really want to build products that are usable, it's not possible unless we create workforce that's emerging out of this intersection. So it's not that it's merely an add-on, but we are, and a couple of decades later, it's going to be an essential part of it. But as Shelley rightly pointed out in one of her discussions, the inertia is huge. There are institutional structures and all over the place that are not in a very conducive place to integrate this. But I guess with a little bit of advocacy and the kind of work that University of Dayton is doing, I think that we would be able to sail it through and provide really relevant answers to how this intersection of future would look like. So thank you so much, everyone. It's
Thanks,
nice being here.
everybody. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to everybody online. Apologies that we didn't see you at first. I can now see there are 20 of you. And thanks to everybody for participating in the plenary.